Finally, let's wrap the show with one other realignment story. And let me just say this. If you thought the Florida State situation was bad with the ACC, it somehow just gets way, way, way worse with the Pac-12. Not trying to be negative Nancy here on a Monday. Certainly want to have kind of a glowing outlook on things. But things are just not looking good for the Pac-12. And so when we last talked about the state of the Pac-12, as usual, surprise, surprise, I was ahead of this story as I usually am on most things college sports, okay? So about 2.5, 3 weeks ago, whatever it was, the Pac-12 has a meeting with SMU. George Kliavkov, the commissioner of the Pac-12, is actually at an SMU basketball game. And everybody starts talking about, expansion, San Diego State, SMU, UNLV, Boise State. Who is the Pac-12 gonna take next? And I said, wait a second now. I know everybody's talking about expansion. I know it's fun to talk about. It's fun to think about. But before we start talking about who the Pac-12 is going to add, are we sure the 10 schools that are currently in the Pac-12 minus USC and UCLA who leave after this football season and beyond, are we sure that everybody is really together? Because while we just talked about Florida State, while we just talked about the fact that Florida State and the ACC is basically locked in together for the next 13 years, it's actually the exact opposite for the Pac-12. The Pac-12 does not have a TV deal beyond this next coming football and basketball season. In other words, after June of 2024, there is no legal obligation to anyone in the Pac-12 anywhere, except, of course, with USC and UCLA, who are signed with the Big Ten. And so while everybody is saying all the right things and we're in this together, it feels as though we're starting to get to the point where everybody in this conference is really getting antsy and everybody is really kind of looking at, is it time for me to look somewhere else? And so we've gotten a few new updates in the last couple days, but all of them paint a bleak picture for the Pac-12. And I think it's kind of important to kind of give context as to what is going on. When we last talked about this, I said, I don't know if there are real bidders for the Pac-12 for a couple reasons. The biggest reason is most of these other conferences have already signed their contracts through an extended period of time, 5, 10, 12, in the case of the Pac-12, the ACC, 13 years. And so most of the money is tied up everywhere. Most of the major distributors of sports content have their contracts set up and they don't need more inventory. NBC is all good with Notre Dame and the new Big Ten contract. CBS is giving up the SEC after this year, but they have the Big Ten and they have the Mountain West for late night games on the West Coast, specifically for CBS Sports Network. NBC, I just said, Fox, they signed the Big Ten deal, and obviously they are one of two distributors of the Big 12 now, the new Big 12 without Texas and Oklahoma. And ESPN kind of has their fingers in the cookie jar of everyone other than the Big Ten. They have the SEC for the foreseeable future. They have the ACC through 2036. They have the Big 12, a part of that package. And so I think ESPN would technically be interested, but they're not going to overpay for what they believe to be an inferior product. Now, we can argue if it's inferior, because if you look at the Pac-12 football, status right now, it's actually pretty good. Oregon's really good. Utah's really good. Washington is improved. Colorado is going to be interesting with Coach Prime Deion Sanders. But ESPN is kind of like, we'll pay, but we're not going to go crazy overspending because we just spent a bunch on the SEC and a little bit on the Big 12. And so it's put the Pac-12 in this bad situation. And the last few weeks have even made it worse. Because the one thing about the Pac-12 that I think we all thought was that there was this pot of gold at the end of the TV rainbow that are called the streaming networks. And I think most of us thought, okay, the SEC, listen, the SEC is the Goliath. They're not going to streaming. They don't want to make it hard for their fans to find their games. Big Ten doesn't have to. The Big 12 is mostly going to be on linear TV. The ACC is going to be on linear TV. But if there's one conference that is going to give, that is going to say, you know what, we will be the guinea pig for streaming. We will be the conference that goes to Amazon Prime, Apple TV, whatever it is. And I hate to nerd out on these apps. Many of you don't even use these apps, but I'm just saying, like, the Pac-12 was the one that felt like, okay, we're going to have to do this, but there will be a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's all going to work out. We're going to get our schools all this money. Well, just one problem. The reports the last few weeks are not very good. Amazon TV, I don't want to say they have no interest, but they just spent what, $1 billion a year on the NFL? You think they're in a rush to overspend for the Pac-12 just to have content? They have plenty of content. They have, for the $25 million that they would have to pay Utah or Arizona State, they can go make 2 or 3 movies that you're going to watch and stream. And I'm not a streaming expert, but you get the point. Then there was talk about Apple TV. Well, Apple TV is going to get in the mix. Well, just one problem. Brett McMurphy, really well-respected college football reporter, put out this tweet on Friday. He said, Apple TV still has not made a formal offer for the Pac-12 media rights. But it gets worse, Pac-12 fans, because here's what he said. He said that Ion TV, something called Ion TV, has emerged as a potential Pac-12 partner. Sources told Action Network. Ion TV is owned by EW Scripps Company, which has 61 local TV stations nationwide and launched Scripps Sports this past year. I'll be honest. When I saw this report, I made the joke, but it wasn't really a joke. I think Ion TV is a real thing, but I'm not 100% sold. Is Brett McMurphy making this up? Is this a real account? No, it's a real account, and it shows you how bleak things are for the Pac-12. Right now, there are no real bidders that we know of for this league. And so what's going to happen is one of 3 things, and none of them is really good right now for the Pac-12. One, they're just going to have to take a substantially below market value. And the ACC was just complaining about falling $30 million behind of the SEC and the Big Ten every year. The Pac-12 might even be worse. Is that $25 million a year per school per team? Is it $20 million a year per school? I don't know, but it's not going to be even in the stratosphere of the Big Ten and the SEC, and it might even be behind the ACC and the Big 12. So that's one. That's option number one. Option number 2 is you go all streaming and nobody can find your games for a league that's already struggling with exposure. Imagine being Dan Lanning, the football coach at Oregon, having to walk into the home right after Alabama and say, yeah, you just got to connect the router to this and, Amazon Prime, and you'll figure it out in Ion TV. Not good. Those are the 2 best case scenarios. Either you get underpriced and get on linear TV, or you end up almost exclusively on streaming. And then 3, and this is probably at this point, and I hate to say it, the most realistic option. I don't know if the Pac-12 is going to make it. And I want the Pac-12 to make it. I live on the West Coast. I think it's good for college sports to have a West Coast presence, but it does feel like everybody's starting to get antsy. And as I said at the beginning, all the schools are saying all the right things, but it's one thing to say the right thing, and it's another thing when push comes to shove, and you got to figure out what is best for the future of your school. Yeah, Arizona and Arizona State and Colorado and Oregon and Washington want to stay together, but if the better alternative is to do your own thing, then they're going to do it. And so a couple things to watch here. First, the Big Ten. They're going to have a new commissioner. Kevin Warren is on the way out. We've talked about that quite a bit. What happens to the Big Ten? Do they reconsider expansion? Is Washington and Oregon on the table? Is Stanford and Cal, the 2 academic powers, on the table? That's worth monitoring. And then the one that's really worth monitoring is the 4 corner schools. Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado. Do they go to the Big 12 with obviously the Oklahoma States, the Baylors, the things like that? I hope the Pac-12 stays together. I think in their heart of hearts, the 10 schools want to, but they're not going to take a terrible TV deal just to stay together. This is kind of sad, and it's definitely something worth watching.